So, ladies and gentlemen, today I have my teacher who is safe and sound in his home during this tough times. But I thought, why not bring him out and learn something from him during this time? Well, we are all confined in a space. So we have a very interesting topic today about qualifying like Arista Yogas or Malefic Yogas, as in what actually makes, just like Raj Yogas can become weak and not perform to their fullest potential. What about a Malefic Yoga not performing to its fullest potential? So for example, if somebody's supposed to get in an accident, it doesn't happen because that yoga wasn't so strong or in strength to perform that. So I thought it was a very unique subject. So of course, I'm going to bring the absolute expert on it, which is my teacher, Mark Boney. Hello, sir. How are you? Staying safe, hopefully.
Thank you, Kapiel. I am quite well because I'm basically staying home, sheltering in place like everyone else. And
okay.
Basically, I go out to walk my dog, and that's about it. Right?
Yeah.
So thank you for asking. And
Absolutely.
this is an interesting topic. Yogas, of course, people on this show have heard me say that are the essence of Jyotish and the thing that make it unique. But of course, then the qualification of the yoga, to what degree it will give its fruit, is a major thing to evaluate in a chart, right?
Yeah.
And the skill of doing that. And it can be difficult. It can be a complex sort of thing. So we've talked about favorable yogas and how they then, sometimes give their full fruit or partial fruit or no fruit at all. So this is the flip side of that, right?
Yeah.
So negative yoga. So I'm going to share a screen and bring up a document here.
Okay.
And you can tell me when that's displaying.
Okay, now it's there.
Okay. So Arishta is one of those frightening words in Jyotish, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
It means misfortune or unfortunate combination. And of course, there's all kinds of misfortunes that people suffer from. Mm-hmm. And of course, therefore, there are planetary combinations in Jyotish that can give rise to that, just in the same way that there's all kinds of good fortune that a person can experience. And there are combinations, planetary combinations that reflect that type of karma. So there are many types of Arista Yoga, is the point that I'm making. And what I thought I would focus in on is the unfortunate combinations that are given in the Sanskrit classic Paladipika, one for each house. And of course, each of them have their own Sanskrit name. You can learn the names, that's not so much important. What's important is that you recognize the pattern. And the pattern is the formula, the same for any house. And I'm given the formula here. And the formula is essentially that it starts with the idea of the house lord falling into 6, 8, or 12, okay? Unless, of course, it's the 6th, 8th, or 12th lord itself, right? So it starts with one of the house lords, any house lord, falling in 6, 8, or 12. That alone will not give an unfortunate combination necessarily. Additionally, what has to be there is there has to be the additional influence of natural malefics, either on the house itself or the lord, or both. And then here's the key thing about what modifies it or not. The total absence of the modifying influence of natural benefics onto the house of the Lord makes a particular virulent Arista Yoga. So if the Lord is ill-placed in 6, 8, or 12, if it has additional influence of natural malefics, the house or the Lord or both, and there's no influence, modifying influence of natural benefics on the house or the Lord, this can give rise to an unfortunate combination related to that house and therefore the indications of the house, okay? So of course, the first house being so important, it represents the person, represents their physical embodied being, it represents their health. So when you have this patterning with regards to the first house, first lord, it can be a particularly challenging thing because very often you'll see that the health suffers, right? And of course, one of the main ways in which human beings suffer is through bad health, right?
Right.
So this is something that needs to be seen, but what needs to be seen is also things that modify this, right? So I thought first I would show an example where there's not really modification, in which case there's what I call a full-blown Arista Yoga as it relates to the first house. This is actually given the term Ava Yoga in Paladipika. And I'm showing you the chart of someone who I was asked to give input about because they were the daughter of a good friend of mine. And I'll share with you that when I saw this patterning here and what periods they were running, it kind of filled me with gloom. Because where is the first Lord placed here?
In the 8th house.
In the 8th house. Now, that alone isn't necessarily, in Arista Yoga, isn't necessarily a problem, although it's going to highlight their interest in 8th house matters, right? But then, do you see any malefic influence on either Jupiter, the Lord, or on the house? First house.
I mean, if you consider the Rahu's aspect, that would be the only thing influencing Jupiter. But the dispositor of Jupiter is not receiving any malefic aspect.
Look at the house. Look at the first house.
Oh, the first house. Oh, I thought you meant Jupiter. Okay. The first house, oh, Saturn and Mars. Yes.
Right. So you're correct. Unless you take the aspect of Rahu, there's no additional malefic influence on Jupiter, but on the house, there's the influence of the two worst malefics, Mars and Saturn. Now, here's the additional point. When natural malefics are involved in an Arista Yoga, like you see here, and they are retrograde, it becomes worse.
Oh, okay.
And additional point, if the natural malefics involved in Arista Yoga are also primary Maraka planets, then it becomes still worse.
Okay.
So you can see here that Mars is a primary Maraka as the second Lord.
Yeah.
And both Saturn and Mars become primary Marakas by being in the 7th house. You see?
Yeah.
Now, is there any additional benefic influence either on the Lagna or the Lagna Lord that might modify this?
No.
No. And the other thing that helps modify Arista Yoga is when natural benefics fall in the angles.
Yes.
Are there any natural benefics falling in the angles?
No.
No. In fact, who's in the angles?
Rahu, Ketu, Saturn, Mars.
Right. This gives
Are you creating the Naga Yoga or no?
It's creating a Navamsa yoga, that is having to do with the whole planetary pattern given in Parashara Hora and other classics that call it Sarpa Yoga, not Kala Sarpa.
Sarpa Yoga, sorry, yes, not Naga, Sarpa Yoga, yeah.
But Sarpa Yoga. This is Sarpa Yoga and has a very distinguishing feature of this chart. So I was asked to give input about this chart when this person had moved into their major period of Saturn, sub-period of Mercury.
Okay.
So now we come to the idea of qualification. So do you see Saturn here having the major period lord having any source of strength?
Yeah, it's in Parivartan Yoga with Mercury.
Do you see any other source of strength?
Directional strength.
Do you see yet a third source of strength? Look at its degrees.
Oh, Vargottama.
Right. So this is a very, very strong Saturn. Now, some beginning student thinks that if a planet is strong, that means it's going to be favorable. And that's just not correct. All strong means is that it's going to give its results strongly, whatever those results are.
Yeah.
And in this case, its results are a part of a very malefic Arista Yoga, Sarpa Yoga, and as a Maraka as well, right? Now, come to the sub-period of Mercury. In an exchange with Saturn, also a Maraka, right?
Yeah.
Now, students listening may not be aware that planets in the 11th house can actually bring illness because of this principle Bhavat Bhavam, where it's the 6th house from the 6th house.
Yes.
Have you seen this?
Yes.
And then, of course, who's the house lord? What house lord rules deadly diseases?
6th house.
8th house, deadly disease.
Oh, deadly. Okay, 8th house.
And you see Mercury here in the 11th house with
8th
Venus.
Venus.
So why was I contacted about this chart? It had been discovered that she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. That means cancer's in more than one part of the body. And initially she was responding well to treatment, but I didn't have a good feeling about this. Now, one thing everyone listening should understand is that if a person dies, if a person passes, if they go into their next incarnation, it's not a question of Arishta. that's a question of ayus, question of longevity. You can see many examples where people get deathly ill with deadly diseases, but they recover. Right?
Yeah.
You might say it's not their time. Right? But of course, in running the major period of a primary maraka and the sub-period of a primary maraka, where these are Arista Yogas, there's real danger, right?
Also, Mercury is hemmed between two malefics.
You could see the hemming here as well.
Yeah.
Right? I was particularly fearful of the sequence Saturn, Mercury, Mars. Right? And unfortunately, she did pass during this time.
Okay.
So it's a sad case, kind of a morbid topic, but
How old was the person?
they were in their mid-30s.
Mid-30s, okay.
A fairly young person. Now, the irony is, and sometimes beginning students have trouble grasping this, the same combination that can be giving a very bad result from one angle could be giving a good result from another angle. You'll notice here that Mars is the 2nd and 9th lord, and it's combined with Saturn, who's also the 11th lord. Mm-hmm. So what kind of yoga does this give?
This creates a Dhan Yoga and Raj Yoga.
Well, Dhan Yoga.
Yeah.
All right. Specifically Dhan Yoga. And the fact is, she was earning
isn't Mars creating a Raj Yoga, 9th lord in Kendra?
By placement, yes. But I was focusing more on just the combination of the two.
Oh, just the combination, okay.
The combination of the two is a Dhan Yoga and with Saturn in strength. And it was giving the result of Dhan Yoga. She was a lawyer who earned well.
Okay.
Right? But at the same time, it has this very sinister side to it that unfortunately also played itself out.
What type of a cancer was it?
That's a good question. I don't recall, but it is in and I don't want to get into that level of detail, but she passed, all right? So this is an example. I wanted to sort of, set the tone of, here's an example of an unmodified, unrelieved Arista Yoga that actually gave unfortunately, its results very strongly, okay? So now, let me review again, what factors can modify an Arista Yoga. Of course, the additional influence of natural benefics, either on the Lord, that is the first house of the first Lord, benefics in Kendras, right? But also, interestingly enough, natural malefics falling in the Tri-Shaddai houses, 3, 6, and 11, particularly the 6, can make one, you might say, resistant to disease and be able to fight disease effectively. Right? So these are also additional factors that I look for when I look for Arista Bunga, the breaking of the Arista, specifically with regards to this kind of Arista related to the first house. Now, here's another chart that poses an interesting question, which is why I'm showing it. For anyone with Libra Lagna, the ascendant lord becomes Venus, right?
Yeah.
But when it goes to the 12th, it's not only in this 12th house, it also is in its debilitation sign.
Yes.
And do you see any additional influence of a natural malefic?
Yeah, but Marka Lord, Mars.
It's Mars, who's also a Marka Lord. So this is that formula again, right? And then we want to see if there's any relief, any modifying influence of natural benefics, either on Venus as the Lagna Lord or the Lagna itself.
Yeah.
The answer is no. And then we might want to see if there's any benefics in Kendras.
No.
Which there isn't. Fortunately, there's not all malefics in Kendras. There is the sun here, a weak sun in its debilitation sign. So this is not anywhere near as problematic as in the previous chart, but still. But here's the question. Because Venus, who's helping form the Arista Yoga, because it's in its debilitation sign, does that mean it's a weak Arista Yoga? And my answer is, in my experience, is no. No.
So the strong will give the malefic effect, even the weak will give the malefic effect.
In my experience, yes.
Yeah.
Now, of course, with debilitated planets, we always look to see if there's some cancellation. There's no real, what I'd call effective cancellation here. And I've watched this chart and, this person has suffered health problems in Venus sub-periods. They're about to move into the Venus major period. But now I always like to see what's the good side of a combination. I always ask myself, what's the best this can mean and what maybe there's some unfavorable thing with me. Well, Venus is the first lord with the seventh lord Mars. So therefore that creates what kind of yoga also?
Raj Yoga.
Raja Yoga, right. And what I know about this person is that they've been training to be a nurse, and they'll graduate soon, and they'll soon then move into their Venus period. So what could it mean? They're going to get a position in a hospital,
Yeah.
dealing with disease.
And is the Parivartana Yoga between Mercury and Mars doing any?
Well, that brings up an interesting question, because in my experience, when a debilitated planet is with a planet who's involved in an exchange, it seems to benefit from that.
Okay.
I've written about this in an article I wrote called An Enigma Wrapped in a Mystery, about when debilitated planets can give good results.
Okay.
But now I want to show one more example of what I would call, so the first one was the sort of the worst case scenario, right? This second one was true Arista Yoga, but not, as bad as the previous one for the reasons we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you talk about accidents, right, are another Arista thing that can happen, in which there could be injury to the body. So where, in terms of what we've talked about, do you see the Arista Yoga here?
Yeah. First of all, the Ascendant Lord is in the 6th house.
Correct. So that's the beginning of it. But then that by itself is not going to be an Arista. What additionally has to be there?
Influence on the Lagna.
Influence on the Lagna Lord of what? Natural malefics, right?
Malefics, yeah.
Specifically, natural malefics. And here we see Saturn and natural malefic in the lot. But of course, Jupiter is not just the first lord, it's the fourth lord in the 6th house.
Yeah.
Of course, 6th house is what? Accidents, right? Besides disease. And in terms of some possession we could have, what is the 4th house rule?
Vehicles.
Vehicles, exactly. So, and then is there any additional natural malefics in the 4th house?
Mars.
Natural karaka of accidents.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a chart of someone who unfortunately has a combination that could mean vehicular accidents in which there could be personal injury, unfortunately.
Did
Now,
it happen already, the accident? Or
I'm going to tell you the story.
okay. Okay, I have a question though.
Okay.
Interesting question here, because if you, I'm sure you know, in Bharat Prashra Hora Shastra, it says that moon considers towards its Mool Trikon sign after 10th degree. So would we consider that Jupiter would be in Parivartana Yoga with moon, or no in this case?
I wouldn't, Kapiel. I wouldn't.
All right.
In fact, since you talk about the moon here, the moon has kind of a special status for anybody with Sagittarius Lagna, because it rules the 8th, but only the 8th.
Yeah.
And it becomes what Kapiel Raaj used to refer to as a pure impression. What kind of results it'll give, malefic or benefic, will have a lot to do with its associations. Here, of course, it's with the malefic Mars, right?
Yeah.
Now, of course, you can make better predictions about an individual if you know circumstances about their background. And what I knew about this person is that there was someone who was involved in some extreme sports.
Okay.
And involving motor bikes, and also regular bikes and motocross, things like that. And they were something of a risk taker and something of a daredevil. And I was discussing this chart with another student of mine, because they had moved into their major period of Venus, sub-period of Jupiter.
Wait, major period of Venus?
Venus.
Venus, okay.
Venus. Now, Venus has brought them all kinds of good experiences in their life. It's a Vargotama benefic as the 11th lord in the 11th house. It's with the 10th lord, their career life has flourished. It's with the 7th lord, they've married during this time. It aspects onto the 5th house. They have 2 lovely children. And he has multiple income streams. So Venus as a major period has been many blessings in his life. But I saw that that sub-period of Jupiter was coming up. Venus, the 6th lord. Jupiter, in this Arista Yoga, also the 4th lord. And of course, they're 6-8 from each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
I saw the potential of a vehicular accident resulting in injury. And unfortunately, it came true. They suffered a pretty severe accident resulting in fairly severe injuries. I won't go into detail about that. The good news is that they've made something of a miraculous recovery. Right?
Okay.
But a vehicular accident resulting in injury was very evident based on yoga show what, dasha show when. Right?
Now, would you have not considered that accident if, let's say, Saturn was not influencing the Lagna? Let's say Saturn was in the second house.
Then there would be no additional malefic influence on the Lagna or the Lagna Lord, and therefore no.
Okay.
In which case, there may have been an accident, the vehicle would have suffered, but the body wouldn't have suffered.
Body wouldn't have suffered. And then also, you know how in our Benefic Yoga with Raj Yogas, we always confirm the strength of the planets in Navamsa, whether they're Vargotama, exalted in their own sign. Are we also looking for a similar pattern in Navamsa as well?
Well, what we're always doing is, of course, qualifying the yoga by seeing the conditions that the planet is in. So if it's in some special condition, favorable or unfavorable, either in the birth chart or Navamsa, we're certainly going to see that, right? Okay. Especially for strength. But again, strength can express itself strongly favorably or strongly. Now, one reason I'm showing this example is that the major period is as a sixth lord. You can't, the best place for the sixth lord for Sagittarius is Vargotama in its Mula Trikona sign in the 11th.
Yeah.
Now, if this Venus was, say, in the 8th, with additional affliction and stuff being the dispositor of the 6th, then he might have been much more severe. So one thing that modified the kind of Arista that could happen here is the Mahadasha Lord, even though it's the 6th Lord, so strong and well placed. Do you see?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Put this Venus differently in a different condition elsewhere, and it's different, it's worse.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, there's a specific reason I want to show this example. This was a chart I was asked to comment upon when the person was born. His parents were astrologically minded, and they came to me and wanted to have a consultation. And it was kind of challenging for me because of some patterns that I saw in this chart. What do you notice in terms of what's happening here between the Lagna Lord and the 8th Lord?
Well, Lagna Lord is in the Parivartana Yoga between 8th and Ascendant.
So, which again, just of itself, wouldn't necessarily be Arishta, but what additionally is going on here? First to the Lagna itself.
2 malefics are impacting the Lagna.
Well, Saturn.
And Sun would also be considered malefic, like a natural malefic.
Mildly malefic, but it's Saturn that's the real problem here. Okay? And this is the reason I'm specifically showing this example, because someone might say, "Oh, wait a second, Saturn's the Yoga Karaka planet.
Yeah,
it's the best planet for Taurus. It rules the 9th and the 10th. How could it be forming Arishta Yoga?" But I'm telling you, a malefic is a malefic.
Yeah.
And when it's configured in this way, sure, Saturn can give Raja Yoga in its periods and subperiods, but it helps form this Arishta. Now, what about additional malefic influence onto the Lagna Lord?
Oh, Ketu.
And
Mars.
As the 6th Lord.
Yeah.
Do you see? Now, here's another paradox. Jupiter, the natural benefic, is not only in the angle, it's in the 1st house, and it gets directional strength, right?
Yeah.
So it has a dual role to play. Interestingly enough, it both helps protect, but it also contributes to the Arista.
Yeah.
And one principle that I found to be very true that Kapiel Raaj shared with me was that when natural benefics, which would normally protect, if they're retrograde, they can't and will not reliably do so. You've heard this idea?
Yes. Learn it from you.
Okay, so we have a retrograde.
Yeah.
And they were born in the Jupiter Mahadasha. So I saw the potential for ill health difficulties right from the beginning. And unfortunately, that came all too true. But then what Dasha follows Jupiter?
Saturn.
Right. And In which sub-period within Saturn would you have your greatest concern about health difficulties?
Saturn, Venus, Saturn, Jupiter, and Saturn, Ketu.
Saturn, Venus.
Yeah.
Saturn, Venus. So he entered at Saturn, Venus as a teenager. And again, I will stay away from too many particulars, but he developed such severe health problems that he had to drop out of school. Which again, unfortunately, was all too predictable based on the Arista Yoga that's here and the activation of it in the Dasha sequence, right? Now, Saturn as a major period is going to give him other results. You know, he was being successful in his educational career. That's one thing that Raja Yoga manifesting in this age can give. And he'll go on to establish a career life in his Saturn major period. But at the same time, Saturn participates in and contributes to this Arista Yoga, and the sub-period of Venus had to prove really challenging that way.
Now, would Saturn, Jupiter, and Saturn, Ketu period would bring about similar results or no?
Yes, why not?
Okay.
This is a very, very challenging chart for lifelong health problems.
Okay.
And then we come to strength of planets. Jupiter here has strength, directional strength, right? It's involved in an exchange. Both the Lagna Lord and the 8th Lord Jupiter automatically get strength due to the exchange. But that's not a helpful thing here,
right?
Insofar as this yoga. Now, we're having seen these three charts. See this one that I also was asked to give input about, and in this case, I was able to help relieve a person's anxieties. So I've shown you charts in which the Lagna Lord goes to the 8th, goes to the 12th, and goes to the 6th. Right? Here's another example of the Lagna Lord going to the 6th, and do you see any additional malefic influence?
Yeah, with Ketu.
Rahu Ketu axis, right?
Yeah.
What's the big, huge difference between this chart and the ones that we've looked at?
3 of the beautiful benefics in the ascendant.
All benefics in Kendras.
Yeah.
And in the case of Venus, you see its degrees 118 of its Vagotama.
Right.
It's also an excellent planet for this Lagna ruling both the 5th and the 10th. This person knew a little Jyotish and knew they were moving into their Saturn major period and was very concerned about what it could give. And I was able to tell them that this is Arista Bunga, right? This is a very strong modification of the Arista. Now, could some health problems arise in the 19-year Saturn period? Sure. But what this combination reflected more, particularly with Saturn conjunct Ketu, is they got very much into Ayurveda. They were someone who were very naturally interested in holistic health type and healing, which is, of course, the positive side of the 6th house. And Ketu specifically is a planet associated with Ayurveda. Not only that, and I'm stepping out a little about our topic today, but there's a chapter on Raja Yoga in Purashara, has I think 48 shlokas or verses. The very last shloka says that if there are natural malefics in Trishadais, 3, 6, and 11, and all the benefics are in Kendras, Raja Yoga results. This is a very unusual Raja Yoga that applies to her chart, which the Saturn major period also is given. You see the 2 malefics in the 6th and then the 1 malefic in the 11th. Right?
Yeah.
All the benefics, and of course this combination in the 1st house forms yogas. There's Gajukesari Yoga there. There's Venus is the Yoga Karaka combining with the 7th Lord Moon, right? So this is where a little knowledge.
Jupiter being the 12th Lord in the ascendant cause any issue or?
Well, of course, all house lordships and where they fall have meaning. And if this was, an exchange, say, between 1 and 12,
yeah.
and then there was additional malefic influence and there was no benefics, well, this also would give rise to an unfortunate combination. So you have to, it's never a single factor analysis.
Right.
This again, sometimes beginning students do that single factor and draw conclusions that are erroneous because you have to blend all the different factors to come up with some sort of final conclusion. So I'm using this chart as an example of Arista Bunga, right? Effective Arista Bunga. Now, of course, if you want to teach this particular type of Arista Yoga, the chart of John F. Kennedy is sort of the classic example. I think you're aware, most people are aware at this point, that Kennedy had severe lifelong health problems that were hidden from the general public when he was president. Now, he has the classic Arista in the sense that the Lagna Lord, Mercury, goes to the 8th house, not just that, but is with the 8th Lord, who's a natural malefic. Saturn, the 6th Lord, aspects onto that combination, besides aspecting the Lagna itself.
Yeah.
If it weren't for the, now what relieves this combination? What provides some saving grace here?
Oh, Jupiter's aspect on Lagna.
Jupiter's aspect on the Lagna. And it's not retrograde. Not particularly, doesn't particularly have a strong dignity or anything, but it's, there's a statement that I quote from Brashahor about where it says that the influence of the strong Jupiter on the Lagna destroys Arishta in the same way that the glance of Lord Shiva destroys 10,000 sins. And I'm a personal beneficiary of this because the next chart I'm going to show you should also recognize, and it has some similarities to Kennedy. I also have my Lagna Lord in the 8th house with the 8th Lord. Not only that, but with the 12th Lord. While at the same time, Saturn is the 6th Lord, goes to my Lagna. What's the big difference here?
Jupiter looking at the Lagna.
A Swa Jupiter looking at the Lagna.
Yeah.
And what's happening to my Lagna Lord on either side?
Oh, it's in Papkartra Yoga.
Well, not Papa, Shubha.
Oh, I'm sorry. What's happening? Oh, your ascendant. I thought you were talking about Jupiter because Jupiter is him 15 malefics.
No, I'm talking about the Lagna Lord in the 8th.
Yes, Shubhkartra Yoga.
So not just any sort of Shubhkartra Yoga. Jupiter in its own sign on one side and Venus in its own sign on the other. You can't really do much better than that in terms of benefic heaven. And thank God. Otherwise, I would have, like Kennedy, had lifelong health problems. But the fact is, I didn't and haven't. Now, I'm in my Saturn period. I'm in my older age. So have some health problems presenting themselves? Yes.
I'll make sure you never get on a motorcade, which is convertible.
Thank you. Unlikely anyway, right?
Yeah.
But, predictably, and I did. I was teaching a class once, and my Saturn-Mercury period was coming up, and I told the class, I could have some health problems during this time. Saturn-Mercury, because they're a part of this combination, and even though there's, some effective cancellation, doesn't mean it won't manifest at all. What happened? I was in India, then I was in Bali. I got some parasites in my gastrointestinal tract that wreaked havoc for a period of time. Wasn't fun, right? But it passed too. It wasn't a permanent, long-lasting sort of thing, but it was quite predictable that health problems could arise in the Saturn-Mercury period. But thank God there's protection.
Right.
So that's.
But you never had lifelong, since your childhood, any health issues?
None.
Okay.
Now, when I ran Mars-Mercury, I was in college. I was a basketball player. I tore ligaments and cartilage in my knee. Had to have an operation, but operation went well. Knees never gave me any problem. Right?
Okay.
So what I'm pointing out here is that you can have these. It'll manifest to some degree, but what softens that? What modifies that? That's what you wanted to discuss, right?
Yeah.
And here in my chart, fortunately, is a classic example of a good level of Arista Bunga.
Right. Absolutely.
Doesn't entirely cancel the Arista. Don't want to give that impression, but it's going to soften and modify it to a large degree, right? Now, this formula for an unfavorable yoga related to the house doesn't just apply to the first house. It can apply to any house. And again, the formula is that the Lord has to go to 6, 8, or 12. There needs to be additional malefic influence on it on the house of the Lord, and there needs to be the absence of the influence of natural benefics. Focus in on this person's 7th house.
Right.
Seventh Lord goes to the 12th, which in this case would not be a problem because it actually puts the seventh Lord in its own sign.
Yeah.
One of the positive meanings could be that a person could marry a foreigner, which this person did marry. They're an American woman who married someone from Iran. But the story doesn't stop there. Who aspects Mars?
Saturn.
And again, someone might say, well, wait a second. Saturn's this Yoga Karaka for Taurus. And look, it's exalted. How can it cause a problem? Well, look at Mars's degrees. Look at Saturn. It's a very close aspect. And then look at the house itself on both sides.
Yeah, 6-12.
And do you see any influence of natural benefics either on Mars, the Lord, or the house?
No.
No. This is what's called in Paladipika Dushkriti Yoga. And it's a negative patterning related to the seventh house that can give rise to very unfavorable results with regards to seventh house indications, one of which, of course, is spousal relationships. This person married. The man turned out to be emotionally and physically abusive. She left the marriage fairly early on, tried to have other relationships thereafter, but the pattern tended to repeat itself. And really, for most of her adult life, she stayed out of relationships. In other words, she's not had favorable karma at all with regards to. Now, the good news is that she's found other ways to have a very, very meaningful life. There's a beautiful Saraswati yoga here that repeats both from the birth lagna and the moon. There's Amala Yoga, the two benefics in the 10th house with the aspect of Jupiter. They form Raja Yoga. She's just been a wonderful teacher of many different subjects, yoga being one of them. So she's had a good and productive life. She has good yogas in her chart. She's run those periods, they've activated. But when she was running Saturn, this Dushkriti yoga got activated and she had a very bad experience in relationship.
Okay.
And the fact that Saturn's exalted and the Yoga Karaka planet doesn't change that.
Right.
Now, chart of Angelina Jolie has some similar patterning in the sense that the seventh Lord, Saturn, goes to the 12th with the aspect of Mars.
Yeah.
This is also Dushkriti Yoga. But what modifies this? What influence does the seventh house also get?
Aspect of Venus.
Aspect of the natural benefic Venus. And so, yes, she's been married 3 times and now divorced, but she did have a long-lasting relationship for over a decade or more with Brad Pitt in the Venus period.
Yeah.
As soon as she moved out of it, things changed.
Right.
Okay? So this is, whenever you hear a yoga starting with DU, like Dushkriti Yoga or Dur Yoga, you know it's not good because, of course, the root of that, you have the word dukkha, which means suffering, right?
Yeah.
But this is not a full-blown Dushkriti Yoga like we saw in the previous chart, but this is a modified Dur Yoga, but still the effects of Dur Yoga can be seen in the person's life, right?
Yes.
Now, this same sort of idea and patterning can be applied to any house. And again, in Paladipika, each has its own specific name. Again, it's not so much important that you learn the names as you recognize the pattern. So consider the 4th house, 4th Lord here. 4th house does not have the influence of any grahas. Where does the Lord go?
12th house.
And what are the influences on it?
Ketu, Mercury, Saturn.
All natural malefics. Mercury here becomes malefic because it's hanging out with only malefics, right?
Yeah.
Is there any influence of natural benefics either on the 4th house or the 4th Lord?
None.
None. Now come to the Saturn-Mars period. She and her husband were impoverished. They couldn't pay their rent. They were evicted from their apartment and they were homeless.
Wow.
Because, of course, Saturn's also giving what's called a Daridra Yoga, combination for impoverishment. It's the 2nd Lord in the 6th house with all malefic influence.
Okay.
So this is an example of an unrelieved unfortunate combination. There is no modification. Now, if there was a benefic influence under the fourth house of the fourth lord, then you wouldn't have this level and severity of experience. So with any yoga, how do we qualify it? We qualify it based on the conditions of the planets involved, and we qualify it based on what additional factors are present that may modify it favorably or modify it unfavorably. With Raja Yogas, for example, if they have the additional influence of a strong natural benefic, they get enhanced.
Right.
If they have the influence of a strong natural malefic, who's also got a bad lordship, they get blemished. Doesn't mean they don't give Raja Yoga in both cases. It's just that the quality of the fruit is going to change. And so this is what I had to share with you today, you and your audience.
Perfect.
Questions about things we discussed at all?
No, I think you pretty much clarified everything. And I was asking all the questions in the middle, so I think that cleared it up.
One thing that maybe I didn't touch upon a moment, Navamsa is very important to consider, not just in terms of conditions of planets, that then, inform us about what quality the yoga will give in the birth chart. But if patterns repeat in the Navamsa, presuming, of course, that the Navamsa Lagna is correct, right?
Right.
So let me take a positive example. Say someone has a good Gajikesari yoga, Moon-Jupiter combination in the birth chart, and it repeats in the Navamsa. You'll see that in the case of the famous basketball player Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, right? And his Jupiter period, he was the king of the basketball world. One of the reasons that could be seen was that the yoga not only applies to the birth chart, but it applies to Navamsa, and you can see that his Jupiter is involved in an exchange, giving it strength in the birth chart, and it's exalted in the Navamsa. So, you do have to see what happens to these planets that form yogas in the birth chart. You have to see what happens to them in Navamsa, and in particularly, and I just saw an example today, someone has a nice Saraswati yoga, and then in D24, that divisional chart having to do with, specifically with educational achievement, Saraswati yoga repeats. He's getting his PhD in mathematical finance during this time. So in other words, he's having high educational achievement and running the period of one of the planets involved in the Saraswati yoga, and the Saraswati yoga repeats in the relevant divisional chart.
Now,
so this gets more complex. This adds a level of complexity, but again, it's a part of qualifying yogas.
Right. Now, the chart that you were showing where the couple was homeless, was that pattern repeating in the Navamsa in a similar way or no?
I don't recall. And it wouldn't have to repeat in order to have that happen.
Okay.
But if those planets are also ill-placed in the Navamsa, and if the pattern did repeat, well, then it'd be a more, unfortunately, a more definite indication of what that period could bring.
Okay.
So you were asking about, well, where does the Navamsa come in, right?
Yeah.
And the Navamsa always comes in, which is why it's considered the most important divisional chart, not just for seeing karma with spousal relationships, but things in general.
And when it comes to dealing with specifically health, would you also consider the D27 chart or only Trimsamsa?
Well, this brings up an interesting question. A close associate of K.R. Raaj, Dr. K.N. Charak, who was a surgeon, right? You may be possessed or have seen his book on medical astrology.
I believe
much of what is in that book, the original inspiration for it was what you heard from Rao. And whereas I can't specifically say why, you'll see over and over again he's referring to D3, the Drekana, and D12.
D12, okay.
Of course, there's also the Trimshamsha. The word D30 is specifically means Arista, the word associated with the misfortune. So, of course, D30 should be consulted with. Those who are an aficionado of somebody like Shashadri Iyer, who used the Tajika charts, they would say D6. But that depends on whether you use the traditional Parashara divisions or whether you can branch out from that. So yes, to see where certain planets that form Arishta, for example, are then also, what you're mostly looking for is confirmation, right? Confirmation, because if the Rashi in the relevant divisional chart, and this is true for all yogas, if the planets then continue to support the idea of whatever the yoga is you're looking at. For example, for Raja Yogas, what does Raja Yoga mean? It means position, status, success, right? So if you have good Raja Yoga planets in strength in the birth chart and in D10, they're also well placed and strong, then it's going to boost up the kind of results that Raja Yoga can give when those planets become active in the Dasha sequence.
Nice.
So this whole topic of qualifying yoga is a very interesting one, a very important one, but it's also what level of complexity do you want to bring into play, right?
But you've never dealt with the D27 though for health.
I've not worked with D27.
Okay. All right.
I mean, I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I'm just saying it's not. I follow Kapiel Raaj's example, as you know, right? I never once heard him refer to D27 or any of his case studies refer to it. Again, which is not to say that it doesn't have any validity. It's just not something that I'm.
Okay. Now, one thing I was interested in, maybe, I don't know if you think it's a good idea to make, because at my age, I want to know. I'm not really afraid of that, but I'm just wondering if learning about longevity of a chart would be a good subject to tackle one day.
Yeah. Of course, with all my 8th houseness, longevity, held a big fascination for me, right?
Yeah.
Kapiel Raaj always referred to it as a morbid subject. He didn't teach it except in the Jaimini system, just in general terms, in terms of being able to determine short span, middle span, long span.
Right.
I've written an article about this called Lord Yama Pays a Visit. It's available, on Amazon if anyone wants to have a look.
Okay.
But personally, I sort of agreed with Kapiel Raaj and decided not to go deeply into the subject of longevity. It's probably the hardest aspect of Jyotish to get right. The different things that are given in the ancient texts, if you just go by them blindly, they don't work. I tried them. It's a very
I guess it requires some sort of a clairvoyance with the Jyotish knowledge also.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Like you, I wouldn't mind knowing myself, right?
Yeah.
And there's certain periods coming up in my life, periods and sub-periods that, hold some potential this way, but it's not something I teach, not something I would even consider myself capable of teaching, and certainly not a prediction I would ever make, even if people were asking for it. And I want to say that you could have the most severe Arista yoga, and it could be making you deathly ill, and it doesn't mean you're going to die.
Right.
According to karmic theory and Jyotish, time of our death is even sort of somewhat karmically predetermined. This is where we have this idea, when it's your time, right? And, you could be deathly ill, and if it's not your time, and we have all kinds of instances of near miraculous recoveries, right?
Right.
But like in the case of that first example that I showed you, the daughter of my friend, it was obviously her time. She was running Maraka periods involved in a severe Arista, and she passed.
Yeah.
But we know from the Bhagavad Gita and teachings of all spiritual masters that death isn't the end of anything, except the body, right? And that will go on, and hopefully her soul's in a good place. So we must keep that in mind, right?
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me on your show. I hope we shared something valuable.
For sure. Do you have any books or courses coming up?
Well, thank you for asking. I'm very proud of the fact that I published what I just published, just appearing on Amazon now. I haven't even announced it. One of the best books I think I've ever written. It's called Predicting Major Life Events. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And you may have taken a course I taught.
Course on it, yeah. Remember.
And essentially the instructional material that I did in that course got shaped up into a book, and now I've published the book.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And it shows the use of, what Kapiel Raaj referred to as the composite technique, where you can improve predictive accuracy by simultaneously using the Parashar system alongside the Jaimini system, right? And what I like about the book is that, it's not filled with retrospective examples on the life of celebrities. It's mostly filled with predictions I was able to make successfully using Kapiel Raaj's methodology that I tried to explain in detail that any student can learn and sort of apply themselves. So that's one thing. I am going to be starting in May, and this will be announced on my website soon, teaching my course on Graha Yogas, right?
Yeah.
based on my 2-volume book, Graha Yoga Deepikas. Again, this is a favorite topic of mine, and there'll be lots of discussion of Graha Yogas and how to qualify them. It's going to be an 8-week course, so that's coming up, so I would mention that as well.
And
Those are the
also,
three
I've
things.
been waiting for your health course, diseases.
Yes, it'll come. You know,
Okay.
I was going to be teaching it in Russia in May, and that was going to be the springboard, but of course I'm not going anywhere in May.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's been postponed, hopefully to the fall, but it will happen at
Okay.
one point. Okay?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mark, for coming again.
You're welcome.
You
Namaste.
stay safe.
Bye-bye
Thank
now.
you. Bye-bye.